In a small, serene village tucked away at the edge of an ancient forest, life was simple but deeply rooted in traditions and superstitions. Here lived Amina, a devoted wife known for her culinary skills, a trait that had made her popular among the villagers. Her meals were celebrated not just for their taste but also for the mysterious ingredients she used, herbs no one else seemed to recognize, often gathered during her nightly walks into the forest. Amina, though admired, was not entirely understood. Her calm demeanor carried an air of secrecy, and her quiet resolve made her the subject of whispers. Her husband, Idriss, was a hardworking farmer. With sun-kissed skin and calloused hands, he toiled from dawn till dusk to provide for them. Idriss loved Amina deeply but often found her habits peculiar. While he marveled at her culinary creations, he dismissed the stories surrounding her late-night escapades as mere gossip. "The forest is a second kitchen," he would joke, brushing off the villagers' superstitions. To him, Amina's eccentricities were simply part of her charm. The couple's home sat on the outskirts of the village, where the dense forest loomed like a silent guardian. The villagers rarely ventured into the woods, citing tales of restless spirits and strange happenings. Yet, Amina seemed unbothered, often returning with bundles of unfamiliar plants and flowers, much to the curiosity of her neighbors. Despite their contrasting lives, Idris rooted in the fields and Amina seemingly in the mysteries of the forest, they shared a bond built on trust and love, at least on the surface. One evening, as the village rested under a canopy of stars, Amina was alone in her dimly lit kitchen. The warm glow of a single oil lamp illuminated her face as she carefully prepared the night's meal. The pot on the fire emitted a faint, peculiar aroma, unlike the usual spices she used. Amina's hands worked deftly, mixing ingredients with precision. In one hand, she held a bundle of glowing herbs she had gathered from the forest just hours before, in the other, a vial of dark powder she poured sparingly into the pot. Her actions were deliberate yet hurried, as though she were racing against time. "This will keep you safe," she murmured under her breath, her voice barely audible over the bubbling stew. Her expression was a mix of determination and unease, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting someone, or something, to enter. Idris walked in, weary from the day's work. He greeted her with a warm smile and sat at the wooden table. Amina placed the steaming bowl before him, her hands trembling slightly. "Eat, my love," she said softly, her voice carrying a strange urgency. Idris, oblivious to her anxiety, dug into the meal with his usual gusto, complimenting her as always. But as Amina watched him eat, her nervous glances betrayed a secret she was unwilling to share. The meal she had prepared, though seemingly ordinary, was no ordinary dish. Its ingredients were more than sustenance, they were a safeguard, a silent shield against something she feared Idris could never understand. The flickering light of the lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and the forest outside seemed to whisper secrets only Amina could hear. The meal was more than nourishment, it was a barrier against the unseen forces she believed threatened their very existence. And yet, as Idris continued eating, oblivious to the gravity of her actions, Amina knew the truth could not stay hidden forever. The first sign of change came quietly, like a breeze brushing past an open window. Idris began experiencing vivid and unsettling dreams. At first, they seemed like harmless fragments of his busy days, a forgotten tool in the fields, a sudden storm washing away the crops. But soon, the dreams turned darker. He found himself wandering through endless forest, the trees whispering his name in voices he couldn't recognize. Shadows followed him in those dreams, always just out of sight, and every time he tried to turn back, a chilling laugh echoed through the woods. During the day, Idris felt restless and unusually weak, his sturdy frame now burdened with unexplained fatigue. His tools would slip from his hands, and more than once, he found himself losing track of time. One evening, he realized he had been sitting in the field for hours, staring blankly at the horizon. Must be the harvest taking a toll, he reasoned aloud, brushing it off as exhaustion. But deep down, unease began to stir. Late one night, unable to sleep, Idris wandered toward the kitchen for water. As he approached, he heard Amina's voice, low and urgent, speaking in hushed tones. But as far as he could see, she was alone. He must not know, she whispered, her back to the door. It's the only way to protect him. If I stop now, they will come. Idris froze. The words hung in the air like a heavy mist. Protect him. From what? And who was she speaking to? He leaned closer, but as he did, Amina's voice fell silent. When she turned around, her face was calm, as though nothing had happened. Couldn't sleep, she asked, smiling faintly. Her calm demeanor unsettled him even more, but he nodded and returned to bed, pretending not to have heard anything. In the days that followed, Idriss's condition worsened. He began hearing faint whispers even when he was alone. Sometimes, the whispers were accompanied by a chill that swept through the room, leaving his skin prickling. The dreams became more vivid, the forest more menacing. A shadowy figure now appeared in his dreams, always standing at a distance, its face obscured. It never spoke, but its presence filled Idris with dread. Meanwhile, the village was abuzz with rumors. A group of elders visited Idris, bringing with them stories of an ancient darkness said to dwell in the forest. The spirits of the woods are restless, one of them warned. Strange things have been happening. Animals disappearing, crops wilting overnight. These are not coincidences. Avoid anything unusual, Idris. Their warnings only deepened his unease. Though he didn't fully believe in spirits, he couldn't ignore the growing strangeness in his life. Amina, however, dismissed the elders' words as mere folklore. Superstitions have no power over us, she said confidently, her tone resolute. But Idris noticed the faint flicker of fear in her eyes, and it haunted him. The tension between Idris's growing suspicion and Amina's secretive behavior reached its peak one fateful night. As they sat down to dinner, Idris hesitated, his spoon hovering over the strange-smelling stew. Amina watched him intently, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "What's in this?" he asked abruptly, his voice laced with suspicion. Amina's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. "It's the same as always," she replied, but her tone betrayed a hint of desperation. Idris set the spoon down, his unease now impossible to ignore. The atmosphere grew heavy, the silence between them thick with unspoken fears. Somewhere in the distance, the forest whispers grew louder, as if urging him to uncover the truth. The seeds of conflict were firmly planted, and both Idris and Amina knew that their lives were about to change forever. Idris's struggles began to take a toll on his body and mind. His once strong frame now felt weak and unsteady. Simple tasks became monumental challenges, his hands trembled while tending the fields, and his once sharp focus blurred. Worse, his dreams seeped into his waking hours. He started seeing fleeting shadows at the edges of his vision, vanishing the moment he turned to confront them. His heart raced at the faintest sounds, convinced someone, or something, was watching him. Emotionally, Idris felt isolated. He couldn't confide in Amina, who seemed to avoid any mention of his worsening condition. The once open conversations between them had turned strained, filled with silences that spoke louder than words. Frustration and fear gnawed at him, leaving him unsure whether to confront Amina or trust her assurances that everything was fine. The villagers, too, began to take notice of Idris's decline. Whispers spread quickly through the tight-knit community, and suspicion fell on Amina. "She's always been strange," said one neighbor. "What woman gathers herbs from the forest at night?" another added. Rumors of witchcraft and forbidden rituals gained traction, fueled by stories of villagers who had seen Amina wander in the woods under the cover of darkness. Ngozi, a nosy neighbor, claimed to have followed Amina into the forest one night. She described seeing Amina kneeling in a clearing, surrounded by glowing herbs and chanting softly. Though Ngozi couldn't make out the words, she swore that Amina's voice sounded otherworldly. The elders began to openly warn Idris, advising him to confront his wife and end whatever strange practices she was engaged in. The forest spirits are not to be trifled with, one elder cautioned. If she angers them, it could bring ruin upon us all. Idris, already overwhelmed by his physical and emotional struggles, found himself torn between his loyalty to Amina and the growing doubts planted by the villagers. The weight of their warnings pressed heavily on him, fueling his suspicions. Unbeknownst to Idris, Amina carried the burden of a dangerous secret. In a moment of desperation, she had sought the guidance of Elder Neka, the village's reclusive healer. A flashback reveals her conversation with Neka, who warned her about the ancient spirits inhabiting the forest. "You cannot ignore the signs," Neka had said, her voice grave. "Idris is marked. His life belongs to the forest spirits unless you intervene. But their protection comes at a price." Neka had instructed Amina to gather specific herbs and prepare meals infused with protective charms. However, she had also warned, the spirits will not tolerate defiance forever. Each meal you prepare binds him closer to their realm. Amina had kept this knowledge hidden from Idris, believing it was the only way to save him. She convinced herself that the secrecy was necessary, that the ends justified the means. But as the whispers grew louder and the villagers' suspicions mounted, she began to question her decisions. Idris's condition worsened further, and the presence of a dark force became undeniable. He started waking up in strange places, disoriented and frightened. One night, he found himself standing at the edge of the forest, the whispers louder than ever, urging him to step inside. At the same time, the Shadow Man, a mysterious figure from Idris's dreams, began to manifest more clearly. Dressed in a tattered cloak, his face shrouded in darkness, the Shadow Man appeared at the foot of Idris's bed one night. Though he did not speak, his presence radiated malevolence. His silent, shadowy form seemed to draw closer with each passing night, filling Idris with dread. Amina, too, began to feel the spirit's growing impatience. The protective herbs she used seemed less effective, their glow dimming with each meal she prepared. The forest, once a source of solace for her, now felt hostile and oppressive. She sensed that time was running out and knew that a confrontation with the spirits, and with Idris, was inevitable. The tension between the villagers' suspicions, Idris's deteriorating state, and Amina's hidden struggle created a storm of conflict, drawing them all closer to a breaking point. The darkness surrounding them was no longer confined to whispers and shadows, it was alive, and it demanded resolution. One evening, as the shadows in their home grew longer and darker, Idris could no longer contain his suspicions. Sitting at the dinner table, staring at the familiar bowl of steaming stew, he refused to lift his spoon. "Amina," he began, his voice heavy with unease, "what are you feeding me? What is in this meal?" Amina froze, her hands tightening around the edges of the table. "It's just food, Idris." "The same as always," she replied, her voice faltering. "No," Idris said firmly, pushing the bowl away. "It's not the same. Every night, after eating this, I feel weaker. I hear whispers. I see shadows. What are you hiding from me?" Amina's calm mask shattered. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "I'm trying to protect you, Idris. Everything I've done to save you." Idris demanded the truth, and with trembling hands, Amina began to confess. She revealed the childhood event that marked Idris, a day he ventured too deep into the forest and unknowingly crossed paths with the spirits that dwelled there. "They claimed you as theirs, Idris," she explained. "When you became ill last year, I knew it was their curse. The meals I prepared, they are not just food. They are protective charms to keep them at bay." As Amina spoke, the room grew colder. The oil lamp flickered, and the whispers Idris had been hearing swelled into a low, guttural hum. Suddenly, the shadow man appeared, his form more distinct than ever. His cloaked figure seemed to absorb the light, and his voice cut through the air like a blade. "You cannot hide the truth any longer," the shadow man said, addressing Amina. "You've defied us for too long. Idriss's soul belongs to the forest. Return him to us, or pay the price yourself." Amina stood between Idriss and the shadow man, her voice shaking but resolute. "He is my husband. I will not let you take him." The shadow man laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. "You have delayed the inevitable, but now the debt must be paid. The only question is who will pay it." Amina was faced with an impossible decision. The shadow man presented two options. She could offer her own life in exchange for Idriss's freedom, or the spirits would claim him entirely, body and soul. Idriss, despite his fear and confusion, stood up, his voice trembling but firm. "I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me, Amina. If anyone must face the consequences, it should be me." Amina, tears streaming down her face, begged him to reconsider. "You don't understand, Idriss. If they take you, they will torment your soul for eternity. I can't let that happen." The shadow man watched silently, his presence an oppressive force in the room. "Decide," he commanded. The forest grows impatient. Desperate and heartbroken, Amina turned to the only source of hope she could think of, Elder Neka. Together, they devised a risky plan, a ritual that could sever Idriss's connection to the spirits entirely. However, the ritual came with a dire warning. "The spirits will not let go of him easily," Neka said. "If you fail, the price will be far greater than either of you can bear." With no other options, Amina and Idriss agreed to the ritual. That night, they made their way to the forest edge, carrying the ingredients Neka had prepared. The air was heavy with anticipation, the trees looming like silent witnesses. As the whispers grew louder and the shadow man's presence became more tangible, the couple braced themselves for the confrontation that would decide their fate. The turning point had arrived. The protective veil of Amina's meals was gone, and the spirits demanded their due. With love, sacrifice, and defiance in their hearts, Idriss and Amina prepared to face the darkness head-on. The clearing in the forest was dimly lit by the pale light of the moon. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, broken only by the faint hum of the forest spirits. Amina and Idriss stood at the center, holding hands, as Elder Neka arranged the ritual items around them, a circle of glowing herbs, bowls of ash and water, and a carved wooden effigy symbolizing the shadow man. Neka began chanting, her voice low and rhythmic, weaving ancient words that resonated through the trees. The shadows surrounding the clearing began to shift and writhe as if alive, and then the shadow man appeared. His presence dominated the clearing, a towering figure cloaked in darkness, his face hidden but his gaze palpable. "You cannot break the bond," the shadow man hissed, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "Idriss is ours. His soul has been marked since the day he wandered into our domain." Amina stepped forward, defiant. "He is not yours. His life is his own, and we will fight to take it back." The shadow man laughed, a hollow, bone-chilling sound. "Then fight," he said, and the shadows around him surged forward, engulfing the clearing. As the shadows closed in, Neka urged Idriss and Amina to remain inside the circle of protection. But the spirits grew relentless, whispering cruel truths to weaken their resolve. "You're the reason he suffers," the voices hissed at Amina. "Your meddling brought him closer to us. You'll never escape us," they taunted Idriss. "The forest always takes what it is owed." At the climax of the ritual, Neka called for the ultimate sacrifice. "To sever the bond, something of great value must be offered," she said. Amina immediately thought of the family heirloom Idriss treasured, a gold medallion left by his late father. Without hesitation, she held it up. "Take this," she cried, but leave him." The shadow man paused. "A noble offer," he said, "but not enough. This is not about objects. To break the bond, one of you must willingly give your life." Idris stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Then take me," he said. "I will not let Amina suffer for my mistakes." Amina screamed in protest, but before she could stop him, Idris knelt at the edge of the circle, ready to offer himself. As Idris knelt, the forest grew eerily silent. The shadow man loomed over him, the shadows closing in. But just as they were about to envelop him, Amina stepped forward, clutching a handful of glowing herbs. She threw them into the fire at the center of the circle, releasing a blinding burst of light. The shadows recoiled, hissing in anger. Neko's chant rose to a crescendo, and the spirit's hold began to weaken. The shadow man snarled, his form flickering as the light consumed him. "This isn't over," he warned, his voice echoing through the clearing. Then, with one final surge of light, he vanished, and the forest fell silent once more. The ritual was complete. The bond between Idris and the spirits was broken, and the oppressive presence lifted. Idris collapsed to the ground, exhausted but free. Amina knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe now," she whispered. The next morning, Idris awoke in his home, feeling lighter than he had in months. The whispers were gone, and the shadows no longer lingered. Amina explained what had happened, and though he felt immense guilt for the burden she had carried, he also felt gratitude for her unwavering love. The villagers, upon hearing of the events, were divided. Some praised Amina's bravery, while others remained wary, warning that the forest spirits might return. The forest, once a source of dread, seemed to retreat into quiet slumber. The glowing herbs Amina had used withered and disappeared, as if their purpose had been fulfilled. Neka warned the villagers never to disturb the forest again, and from that day on, it became sacred ground. As life returned to normal, Amina and Idris found their bond stronger than ever. They had faced the darkness together and emerged victorious. Amina reflected on the ordeal, realizing that true love demanded not just sacrifice, but trust. "No more secrets," she promised Idris, and he vowed the same. But as they sat by their hearth one evening, a faint rustle came from the forest. Though they tried to ignore it, they both knew the spirits were always watching, waiting for another opportunity. Their story had ended, but the forest mysteries remained. The story teaches a profound lesson. True love often requires great sacrifice, but the weight of secrets can be even heavier than the challenges of honesty. Amina's unwavering devotion to protect Idris illustrates that love and trust must go hand in hand. While her secrecy shielded him from immediate danger, it nearly cost them both their peace and lives. The story emphasizes that courage lies not only in selflessness but also in sharing the truth, even when it's difficult. Ultimately, love's strength is tested not by what we hide but by what we are willing to reveal and endure together. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe our African Folktales channel.